Mick Cooper, thank you very much for speaking to us. We're here today to talk about existentialism. When people look back at the literature, what seems to come up a lot is Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism is humanism, and in that he said that existence precedes essence. Can you flesh that out a bit and tell us what he meant by that?
I mean, I guess what that means really is that existential therapy starts very much with the concrete. That it starts with what people's lives are really like, and existentialism is a way of working with people that tries to avoid making lots of assumptions, bringing in lots of theories about kind of inner essences and this part of the person and that part of the person. It really tries to start with what is that person's concrete life like? What's going on? What are the kind of struggles in their life? What are the conflicts? What are the difficulties? And tries to work at that level of talking to people about their lives and helping them find ways forward and solutions and drawing on their strengths and looking at the barriers. It's an approach which is very much about kind of facing up to life as it is. Rather than having, maybe in contrast to say something like person-centered approach, which has ideas about being fully functioning and how we could be. Existentialism kind of starts from the assumption that life's a challenge, it can be tough at times, we all face difficulties, sometimes we face tragedies, we all have losses in our lives, it's never as perfect as we want it to be. And that we tend to do better if we take those things as they are, and without trying to kind of have a perfect life. So it's focus on the concrete, really, I guess, is the meaning of existence precedes essence.
Now, from what I can see, there's a lot of onus on personal responsibility. Is that? Can you explain how that helps in the therapy?
Well, from an existential perspective, what we're interested in is particularly people's choices and the way that people make choices in the world. And we tend to start from the assumption that people have freedom. Doesn't mean they can do whatever they want, but people have freedom within a set of limitations. But whatever those limitations, whether somebody's in prison, whether somebody's in a very difficult relationship, that there's always a certain amount of freedom somebody has. And that part of the problem people have is that they're not always aware of their freedom, and they're not always aware of their choices, and that they do have some choices in whatever situation they're in. So we would work with somebody by helping them to look at what their choices might be, and what are the choices that that they may have made, and help them find perhaps more effective choices. One of the things that comes through from the theory is that people aren't always that comfortable with being aware or acknowledging the kind of choices that they have. Sometimes it's a lot easier to blame other people or to blame things like you're unconscious for the things that we do. If we behave in ways that we don't like, then sometimes we say, well, so-and-so made me do it, or my wife made me do that, or even my therapist made me do that.
No, it's because of something that happened to me in the past.
Yeah, or it's something that happened to me in the past that made me. And from an existential perspective, we kind of challenge that in saying that there is always that possibility for freedom. That's not to say that people aren't influenced by their past. That things happen in people's past that can have enormous influences on them. But within those limitations, within those givens, that there is always a scope for some freedom. And although whilst in the short term it might be more comforting to think, it's nothing to do with me, I didn't choose that, that ultimately it's when we can grasp our freedom and live a life in which we actually take responsibility for what goes on, that we can make the kind of choices that we want to make in our lives that lead us to more satisfying and fulfilling ways of being.
So it's a way a bit, it sounds silly quoting Forrest Gump, but he does say stupid is as stupid does. So is that what you're saying, is that if someone's acting in a cruel way, they are a cruel person and they have that freedom to change, but it's not, they can't just turn around and say I'm cruel because my mother was cruel?
Yeah, I think that people have freedom to change how they are. Now that's not to say it's easy. That I might have a real fear of flying. So if I go near a plane, if I go in an airport, I might get enormous rush of anxiety and adrenaline. But the reality is I still have that choice. There's still a freedom there about whether I get on the plane or not. I can still choose to get on that plane despite how I'm feeling. So from an existential perspective, we don't deny that there might be biological givens or, social, cultural limitations. It's not saying somebody who lives in a kind of flat in the East End of Glasgow can just go out and be a millionaire. But again, it's saying that, and it wouldn't be insensitive to that, and it wouldn't be saying to somebody, look, you have some choices here. But it would be helping somebody to acknowledge or recognise perhaps the choices that they do have, get some sense of how they might be able to change that, and help them think about the kind of choices that they might want to make or the ways that they might improve, which might involve, challenging the political situation they're in, and the culture they're in, which would clearly have an effect on them.
Now, if someone was to read Sartre or Simone de Beauvoir and people like that, they keep coming back to the meaninglessness of life. Now, if I was coming to you as a therapist, I don't think I'd want you to tell me about how meaningless my life was. How does existentialism approach this whole concept of meaninglessness of life, and how is that a positive thing?
Yeah. Well, first thing to say there is there's lots and lots of different kinds of existentialism, and actually there's lots of different kinds of existential therapies. Existential therapy is not one thing. It's a whole family, a whole genre of different approaches, and people have different perspectives on a whole range of questions like spirituality, meaning, what a therapy should be about. I don't think there's many existential therapists who would, if a client comes in and says, I don't know what to do with my life, would say, well, it's meaningless anyway, so there you go. As you say, I don't think that would be particularly helpful. But I think what is very helpful is that if you as a therapist have asked questions about what does life mean, and has entertained the possibility, or perhaps been profoundly affected by the question about maybe it is all meaningless, that I think that allows you to really empathise and be with somebody who's facing those questions themselves. Because if I'm never actually asked those questions, if I've never been in that place of saying, what does my life mean? Somebody might come in and they say, well, I'm just feel like life is meaningless, and I might start saying, well, what about this or what about that, and why don't you get a grip? And actually, I think for people like that, being able to empathise and being able to sit with them in that place and say, yeah, no, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. That's a really good question that I don't have a good answer to, but I'm willing to kind of journey with you and be with you in helping to ask that question, I think can be really important and really valuable. So I think that's the value of it, is not in telling people life is meaningless, nobody would do that, but is in being able to take that question seriously.